Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new around here, then my name is Katie. I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and about a year ago I filmed a video called My Ultimate Art Supplies. It's been really helpful when people have asked me what shades I recommend and what I use to just point them to that video, and so I thought I would film an updated one. So what I'm sharing today are all of the supplies that I use the most. I'm going to be sharing my top colours and the things that I use, from brushes to paints, acrylic markers and my sketchbooks as well. Some of these will be repeated from last year because generally the way that I work is I'll use the things that I know and then slowly add in new colours and work out what I like. But I want to say before we start this video that you don't need all of these supplies. You don't need everything to be an artist or to be a good artist. You can build up your collection slowly. That's what I've done. I've slowly built this over many years, and because I am a mixed media artist, it means I have quite a lot of different things. I don't specialise in just watercolour, for example. I love using watercolour and gouache and mixing things together, and so I do have quite a range of supplies, but not necessarily every single colour or a knowledge that comes with that. So I really recommend using this as a good starting point. Maybe if you're interested in specific art supplies, using these shades as a jumping off point. And also, this might be very different to what you would use. Primarily, I am a landscape and nature-based artist, so a lot of my supplies and the colours that I'll recommend will reflect that. But hopefully this is a good point of reference, and although I'm not going to cover every single thing I use, I think these are all the things that I use the most. Without further ado, let's jump into my sketchbooks. So in last year's video, I raved about the Royal Talens. This is still one of my ride or die sketchbooks. I absolutely love these. They're the Royal Talens Art Creation sketchbooks. You can get them in a range of sizes. This one is the ivory tone paper, but I have done a video, which I'll link up in the cards, reviewing the white tone paper as well, which I know a lot of people were after. Having said that, I have been using these ones a little bit less. I think they're great for mixed media, but because I've started using watercolours a lot more, I've been reaching for paper that can handle it a bit better than this. This does handle wet media quite well, but I find it works better with like thicker paint, and when I want to use my Kuretake Watercolour Set, I'll be reaching for some others. And those are the Strathmore Mixed Media Sketchbook, this is the 500 series, and also the Fontaine Goldline Sketchbook. These handle wet media really well. I find that the pages don't buckle, they're a really good weight, and although I've not extensively reviewed these, I have compared this sketchbook and the Royal Talens, as well as the Etcher sketchbook on my channel before, so again I'll link that up in the cards. I bought the Strathmore when I was in America. I'm definitely going to be repurchasing this because there are only a few spreads left, but again it's got a really lovely paperweight, really nice paper in terms of the smoothness. There is a little bit of tooth, but the Goldline definitely has more of a texture. It does vary from front to back on the paper, whether it's smooth or rough, and I know that can be a downside for some artists, but I've not had any issues. It again handles wet media really well, and I've enjoyed the square format of this one as well. This is called the Mixed Media Art Journal. For all of the things that I'm mentioning today, I will leave a link down below, so there's going to be tons of links in the description box, but hopefully that's helpful so you can see the exact supplies I'm talking about. So those are my top 3 sketchbooks that I've been using this year. This one is generally for when I'm grabbing something quick, and these two are for when I'm using a lot more wet mediums and really trying to throw it on the page. Okay, next up let's talk about paints. Specifically, we're going to start with gouache. Gouache is the medium I feel the most comfortable with and the paint that I use the most. I find it so helpful it can be reactivated, so I do use paper palettes a lot, which is another thing I wanted to mention. These are tear-off paper palettes by Rowney. You can get these really cheap. I prefer these ones by Rowney, but basically I'll put my gouache on here, and when the paper is completely filled, I'll just tear it off and start again. I do use gouache quite thickly as well as with a lot of water, so generally I'll always reuse what's on my palette, re-wet my brush and get a bit more pigment that way. It's one of the biggest learning curves that I've had since starting to use acrylic gouache, because obviously I can't reactivate what's on my palette, so I'm having to really work out how much I'm going to use, whereas with traditional gouache, which is what I use the most, I don't have to worry about that. So in terms of brands of gouache paint, for the designer's gouache I absolutely love Winsor, Newton and Rowney. These are really widely available. They're very common for artists to use these gouache because they are professional grade. You can get a lot cheaper gouache, but for me, I find that these are the best. I love their consistency and I can mix them together. So it doesn't matter if I'm using a Daler Rowney and a Winsor & Newton, they mix really well together. I have this tin filled with gouache, and the way that I built my collection, because obviously it is quite a pricey material, at the very beginning was buying it on eBay and from second-hand sites. You do have to be careful in case they are dried up, but I didn't have any issues, and I found that was a really nice way to build my collection, and they've lasted me years and years despite the amount that I use them. Obviously I do top up time to time, especially my favourite colours, so let's get on to that. This is the Oxide of Chromium. This is a Winsor & Newton shade. Most of these shades you can get with all brands, but this is my most used green. I know a lot of artists say to mix your own greens, but I find this is a really good base for me, and then I'll mix in a yellow or a red on top. But having this as my starting green has meant my landscapes are really cohesive, and I just love the colour. This tube is all wrinkled because I use a toothpaste squeezer to get as much out as I can. Next up is the Cadmium Yellow Hue. This is 620. This is the Daler Rowney Designer's Gouache. Like I said, I mix this in with my greens a lot, and I find it creates a really lovely warm green, and definitely one of my most used colours. So I think most of these are the ones that I mentioned in last year's video as well. I've also got the Primary Blue, again Winsor & Newton, and then the Daler Rowney Burnt Umber 223. I use the blue mostly for skies and also rivers, and mixing that in with a white. My favourite white is from Pebeo. I use a huge amount of white in my work, so just having it in this bigger size means it's much more affordable, and I mix this in with my designer's gouache and it works absolutely fine. You can also get them in jars, but I've actually found that I preferred the squeezy tube because then it doesn't muddy and get other colours in the jar when I'm dipping in my paintbrush. So I intermix that with all of these colours, and then the brown is just really good again for mixing in with greens and using for like tree trunks, and mixing it in with white for paths and bridges and things like that. The last one that I want to mention, which is a new colour that I've started using the past year, which is Naples Yellow. This one is again Winsor & Newton, but I absolutely love this shade. It's been a really nice neutral, slightly different from the Portrait Pink, which I think I shared last time. And I still use a lot of pink in my work, but I've been reaching for this as like a mixing shade for my neutrals, again for landscapes and paths and things like that. But it's lovely, again mixed with greens, and I think this is a really good base colour to have in your collection. Okay, so let's stick with paints. The next thing I want to talk about is my Kuretake Watercolour Set. If you saw last week's video, you'll know that this set has changed because I've added in my own colours. But I started with the Art Nouveau set, and I highly recommend that if you are looking into getting Kuretake watercolours. It's such a lovely range of shades. Again, I've got a video on my channel talking about this before I then modified it and added my own shades. So you can get little pans like this and add them in or have them just separately, and I think that's a really nice way to do it to build up your palette. But for me, I found that modifying the one that I knew I loved and just swapping out some of the colours I didn't use as much with ones that I did use to be really helpful. So that's what I've done here. This is definitely well loved. You can see I've hit pan on a lot of them, but I really love this watercolour. It's really opaque. I love the colour and the vibrancy, and it's really made me fall in love with watercolour this year. So although this is modified, I do recommend the Art Nouveau set if you are starting out with watercolour or wanting to build your collection. Next up is acrylic paint. Now I'm not going to be mentioning tubes. I do sometimes reach for acrylic, but it's not something I use often, whereas acrylic markers is something I've absolutely fallen in love with over the past year. So last year I did mention this one, which is still my most used. This is a Posca one. This is in the beige colour. These are the PC8K Poscas, so they are the 8mm chisel nibbed tip. And these ones I use more than any of the thinner ones. The only downside is they don't come in the huge amount of colours that the smaller nibbed ones do. But the beige is a staple in my art. I definitely recommend getting this one for your collection. I do also like the slate grey, especially for night scenes, but I think the beige is a bit more versatile. So the other brand that I've absolutely loved is the Montana acrylic markers. Now, it's difficult to recommend these because these are shades that I've mixed myself and they are quite pricey. But I absolutely love the ease of use of these. You can also buy Liquitex Markers and Molotow. These are other ones that I've used. I find that the Liquitex can be a bit glossy, whereas the Molotow is more matte, like the Montana. These are ready mixed, but again, the shades is a little bit limited. I've got a whole video about acrylic markers on my channel. There's going to be a lot of links in the description box, but I love the Montana ones because they are nice and matte, and I reach for these when I want to be super quick. They're really accessible, such a nice way to put down a huge block of colour, and I really have enjoyed mixing up my own colours. You can buy these empty and then you get little refill inks, so I'll pop that on screen so you can see. And I have a video on my Patreon where I did fill these. I mostly reach for them when I want to be quick and do like some timed works, but they're just such a nice way of putting down paint without having to faff with paintbrushes and water. It's just been a new medium that I've absolutely fell in love with this year. They're also super handy for plein air work, so again, not having to take tubes of paint out, and I'm really happy with the colours I've mixed here too. So as I mentioned plein air work there, the other thing that's changed my practice is using these water brushes. So they have a barrel which you can fill with water at the bottom, and these have changed the game for when I am working outside. So much easier than having to take a water bottle and then a pot, and it's just handy to keep these in your bag and grab them. I have a range of sizes and different brands here. I don't think it really matters which brand you go for, but the varying sizes are really helpful, and having a lot of them is really good too, because obviously you don't have a cup of water to wash them out really thoroughly. So I like swapping my brushes and using some for like the blues and then another one for the greens, just to try and keep them clean. You can push through the water to rinse out the brush, but I find it's just easier when I am outside to keep them per shade. It doesn't always work like that, but I have found these to be really helpful when I am drawing on location. And I do reach for them in the studio too. If I don't have a water jug to hand, I'll just grab one of these brushes and get painting. In terms of actual paint brushes, I still absolutely love round brushes. I recommend these all the time because I find they're really the most versatile brush. Obviously there are loads of different types of brushes, but I find the round brushes are the ones I use the most. It doesn't really matter what brand you go for. These two are the graduate range from Rowney, which I do recommend, and this one is just an off-brand one. But I use the size 10 the most. I've also got a size 12, a 14 and a 6. You can see that they have a tapered point, which is really helpful for details, so you can use the full amount of the bristles to get a swathe of colour down, and then if you do want to add in details, which I do often with my paintbrushes, I will just use the tip. So I find these are really helpful and I use them the most. The smaller one has less of a tip, but it's just handy if you want a little bit more control or some smaller brush strokes. The other brushes that I've started to use this year and have fallen in love with, especially because I've started using watercolour more, are these mop brushes. So these are by a brand called Artway. I bought them from Amazon. They came in a set of 3. I've only got the 5 and the 8 here because the other one is somewhere in my studio. But I love these for, especially like I said, with watercolour. I've been using them with my Kuretake set, and they hold a huge amount of water in their bristles, and I just find them really nice for blending. They're super soft, and I thought they were a really good price point, especially because mop brushes can be quite pricey, and I've loved using them, especially in my Strathmore and my Goldline sketchbook. They've been perfect for that paper. Another supply that I've started using a lot more this past year are pan pastels. I didn't mention these in last year's video, but I found these have been really good for adding texture into my work. I have about 9 or 10 now, so not a huge collection, and I do feel like I've got enough now. I've got a range of greens, a few blues and some warmer colours, but I feel like these 3 are the ones that I reach for the most. So we've got this green, which is 220.1 Hansa Yellow Extra Dark, 520.8 Ultramarine Blue Tint, and 740.8 Burnt Sienna Tint. So you can use these on their own as like a base layer, which you can then work on top with, or you can use them over the top of your artwork to like push things back. But what I really enjoy using these for is actually going on top of my brush pens. Again, there's a video on my channel where I've done this and shown the results, but it really softens down some of those marks where you can see you've overlaid the brush pen. Perhaps you don't like the streakiness that comes with, and these are great for layering on top and really softening that down and creating a whole new effect. I've also used these for just adding atmosphere to my pieces, and I really love this blue tint for skies. The burnt sienna tint is great for paths and beaches, and also adding on top of colours you want to dull down. And then the Hansa yellow is really good just for trees and bushes in the distance, and again going over brighter green colours and just paring them back a little bit. I tend to always use these with other mediums rather than just pan pastels on their own, but I really enjoy the effect that they give. So I do just want to mention the tools that I use to apply those pan pastels. I did start by buying a cheap set of makeup sponges, and these are great, but I've actually found that these little tools have worked much better. You can apply the pan pastels with your fingers, but I find it creates a totally different effect when you are using these little sponge applicators. So you can swap out the little sponges, they come off the little plastic tools. I've got some by Sofft with 2 Fs. These I bought from Jackson's Art, but I've also got this cheaper set which I bought from Amazon. They both do the same job basically. They are both just plastic tools that you can change the sponges out on. And I just love the way these apply the pan pastels. It smushes it into the paper really nicely. You can build it up without getting messy fingers, and I've just found them to be a go-to if I am using pan pastels. So I highly recommend those. Something else I want to recommend are the Derwent Inktense blocks. Now there are definitely a couple of colours I use the most, so I'll be mentioning those. But these are a game changer for adding texture in my work. I always find I'm really playful when I grab these Derwent Inktense sets. And I do also love the pencils. I love dipping those into water and creating really thick line work. Again, I've used these and I've got a video all about using Derwent Inktense products. But I love the way that you can just dip them in the water and create really vibrant and intense colours. And the textures are just something I'm always really trying to strive for in my work. So I'm going to pop on screen what these colours are because they don't write them on the blocks. But I definitely use these shades the most, especially the green. This is like my perfect green. I use it all the time in my landscapes for like bushes and things in the distance and creating like grassy verges. I also like mixing that in with the brown, and I definitely use more of these neutral tones more than the brighter ones, but it's really helpful to have them and you can mix them in on the page. You can also sharpen them and grate them. These were sent to me by Derwent last year, so I do have a sponsored video all about that, but they're an absolute staple in my work and I am really glad that I got to try these. Another staple in my studio is Neocolors. I absolutely love these for finishing off some of my paintings. I generally don't use them on their own anymore. I do have a video about using Neocolors where I just used these dry and created a whole illustration with these, but nowadays I just use them for finishing touches. I use them for scribbles and line work on top of a base of things like paint or brush pens, and I just love the thickness and the colours that these give. So this set here has been amended. Again, I've swapped things out and added in my own shades that I use the most of. Again, that's generally the more neutral shades that you'll see in landscape, but I've also absolutely loved using some of the brighter colours as little pops of line work in my landscapes. So I think a lot of these are ones that I mentioned in last year's video, but I absolutely love the light cobalt blue for skies. This is my perfect sky shade, so I use that quite a lot for like suggesting clouds in the sky. I also love the light olive and the olive. Those are really good for adding in suggestions of grass. I also love the lemon yellow. Again, I use this for like grass lines. I really love adding this over darker shade of green just to create that vibrancy and a pop of colour. And then lastly, I've got the salmon pink and the sky blue, which to me isn't very sky blue. The French name of blue lavender is a lot more apt. But I love that. Again, I just pop it around the landscape so it doesn't necessarily live there or you don't see it in person, but I find it highlights things, and balancing it around the page really adds a finishing touch to my landscapes that I really enjoy. I generally feel like I can't finish a piece without adding on Neocolors now, so although I don't use them on their own, they're still a must-have in my studio. You can definitely build up your colours slowly. I obviously have this set of 72, but you can buy them individually, and I definitely recommend giving them a go first before you buy a whole set. You might find that you don't use the brighter colours, in which case just buy the more neutral tones. And I would say these are the Neocolor 2s. So the Neocolor 2s are water soluble. I tend to always use them dry, so I don't usually add water to them, but it's good if you do add in something and you might want to dull it down or take it away. By adding the water, that's really helpful, and it does mean they're very versatile. Okay, so next up let's talk about brush pens. So a lot of these, again, I did mention in last year's video, but they're still my staples, they're still the colours I reach for the most. First up is the Tombow ABT brush pens. So all the brush pens I'm going to mention today are water-based, so they're not alcohol markers. It means I can use water with them to soften them or to blend them together, and it also means they don't bleed through the page like some alcohol markers do. So my top 5 colours for Tombow is the 942, which is a really nice soft beige, the 491 for Skies, again my perfect sky blue, 553, which is a soft lilac colour. I really enjoy using this for shadows. And then for greens, I've got the 158 and the 126. It's a sort of mid-tone green and then a nice olive, and these are definitely my top 5 used. I do use more contrasted shades as well as these, and brighter colours too, but these are the ones that I think are a really good starting point. Next up are the Ecoline brush pens. These are a Royal Talens brand. Generally I find that Ecolines are brighter and a lot more vibrant compared to Tombows. I think they have a smaller shade range, but I do prefer the more natural tones. So we've got the 704 grey, the 728 warm grey light, 381 pastel red, 580 pastel blue and 676 grass green. Now you can see these are a lot brighter than the Tombows, so I love to use these and tone them down with the pan pastels. They're a bit more juicier and wetter than the Tombows, so if I'm using these, I'll put down a layer and then I might come in with the pan pastels or my coloured pencils just to go over the top, rather than using them on their own. But they do blend really nicely. I really love this tone of pink for the pastel red, and I do use the greys quite a lot for buildings and clouds. Generally, I'll use the blue for a touch in the sky. You can also put these onto like a paper palette and wet them with a brush and then apply it to your page. So that's another way to use brush pens, and I love their versatility. Oh, I also missed a colour from there, which was 657 Bronze Green. Again, it's a really bright green, but it's a little bit more toned down than the grass green. I still like using this on its own, but also with the pan pastel on top. And then lastly for brush pens is the Faber Castell Albrecht Durer Watercolour Markers. This is new for me. I only got these in the past year and I have bought a couple more in my collection. I don't feel like I need to keep buying more because I have so many different brands of brush pens now that I feel like I have all the shades I need. But I absolutely love these two colours. So this is the Warm Grey 3 272 and the Earth Green 172. The earth green in particular is a really nice, I'm going to say earthy green. It's kind of pale, it's not too dark, and it's also not olive toned like my usual greens are. So I really love this one, again for bushes and trees. And then the warm grey is just a really nice one, again for buildings, and I feel like these two have become ones that I reach for the most. Okay, let's talk about pencil sharpeners. So my most used is this pastel and charcoal Derwent pencil sharpener. It's very reasonably priced and it's really good for fitting in neocolors. So if you want to sharpen your neocolors, they will fit in here, as well as luminants, because I know they have a bigger barrel than some of my other pencils. So this is a really good sharpener. I find it creates a really nice sharp tip. And then the other one I want to mention is this Faber Castell 9000 pencil sharpener. It has 2 holes, so standard and jumbo. You might have seen this in my recent Japan haul. I actually picked this up on a whim because I forgot my sharpener in my travel art supplies. And I'm so glad I did because it's turned out to be one of my favourite sharpeners. This will be handy for taking with me on location because it does have a little bin which you can empty out. And this one fits neocolors as well as my luminants and all my other pencils. And it's just really, really good. It creates a really nice sharp tip. It doesn't break the pencils, which I know some sharpeners can with the lead. So I definitely recommend this one. This is super handy and one that will be always in my art kit. I've also got clips. I recommended these in the last video as well. I find these really handy for clipping my page out of the way for when I am photographing work and also on location if it's windy. This is the Penco clampy clip. I bought some more in Japan. These are just really handy and very lightweight, but you can also get little metal ones which I use, which I bought from Amazon. Okay, last up in this pretty long video, hopefully you're still with me, but I want to talk about coloured pencils. So I used to use Prismacolors. I absolutely love Prismacolors. I've also got some Faber Castell pencils, but my absolute favourite brand are the Caran Luminance pencils. Unfortunately for me, they are also the most pricey out of all the coloured pencils. So generally I do wait until they are on a 3 for 2 offer or if they are on sale, but I find they are really strong lead but also really buttery. I love the way they glide over the page and they're really good at layering on top of a lot of things. So they're definitely my go-to pencil, and I want to share my top 6 colours because I couldn't narrow it down. Again, you might recognise some of these colours from last year's video, but there are a few new ones as well. So we've got the greens. I've got the dark Thalocyanine green 719 and the olive yellow 015. I think it's really helpful if you are building a collection of anything to have a light, a mid and a dark tone. Here's a light and a dark green, and then if you are wanting to buy more, you can add in a mid one in between. But these are really helpful for my landscapes. And then the one pencil which I use all of the time, I find it works with anything, any line work. If I'm doing portraits, I'll use this too. This is the Dark Indigo 639. It's a really, really dark blue. It just feels a lot nicer than using a black. And like I said, it goes with anything. So this is a staple, and I have gone through about 10 of them because I love them so much. I've got light cobalt blue 661. No surprise there, I use this for the skies. And then some pops of colour. So you might have seen these in my recent haul, but this is the Ultramarine 140 and the Anthraquinoid Pink 571. Again, just like with the Neocolors, I use these for pops of colour. Adds a bit more interest and a bit more vibrancy than just using the standard neutral colours. I really love using these shades. I also want to mention another brand which I've really enjoyed using this year. These are the Derwent drawing pencils. They are slightly more affordable than the Luminant, but I love these for creating textures and building up the textures in my landscapes. My top 5 colours are obviously more neutral and soft tones. We've got the Sepia Red 6110, Olive Earth 5160, Solway Blue 3615, Warm Grey 7010, and Chinese White 7200. All of these are really lovely colours. I really like their shade range. I do often get asked which white pencil I use for really good opacity, and the Chinese White is definitely my favourite. It goes over gouache really nicely, creates a really nice white line, and the other ones are just really good for building up the textures like I said, and I find they really complement my luminances nicely too. So I think that's everything that I wanted to mention today. I know I've just thrown a huge amount of information at you, but I hope this is helpful and that this is a resource that you can return to again and again. If you are building a collection from scratch, then hopefully it's shown you some shades to start with, or if you're building into your collection, then there's some shades that you might not have yet. Like I said at the beginning, I really don't think you need all of these supplies to be an artist or to create lovely artwork. You can absolutely use what you already have, and I highly recommend starting there and building your collection slowly. If you start with colours which you know you'll use, perhaps you have some pencils that you know you love, and then you can maybe get those colours in Neocolors and expand your collection that way, rather than buying a huge multi-pack of colours with 100 shades that you're never going to use anyway. So I hope this has been helpful. A huge thank you for watching, and a really big thank you to my patrons for their support. Without them, I wouldn't be able to create these weekly YouTube videos, and I really value their community and support. So I hope you have a creative week, and I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!